It is believed that the Lanesburg floods were started when a farmer encountered a mermaid and shot at her. That enraged her, and she sent a wall of water down the Buffalo River unexpectedly in 1981. This water turned into a raging sea. Approximately 100 people died, and hundreds of houses were washed away. Much of these stories have controversially made it into Afrikaans traditional stories. In the late 20th century, Afrikaners started using African oral folklore to establish an Afrikaner literary tradition. During a period of rampant Afrikaner nationalism and the battle for indigenous stories began. Such a battle was initiated by the use of the story Klein Riet leen in die roerkruil, meaning little reed alone in the whirlpool. The appropriation of this and other stories caused dismay not only in the indigenous community but also in the Afrikaner purist circles. This story and others were included in a book called Kultuurgeskiedenis van die Afrikaner. Translated, it means Cultural History of the Afrikaner. This book published in 1945, 1947, and 1950. At the end of this book, W. Aselin writes, the Afrikaans culture was not fertilized or enriched by indigenous ethnic groups of the Bushmen and the Hottentots or the Bantu. At the time, the Tokolosh penetrated the Afrikaans beliefs, and white wrote thousands of stories about their Tokolosi, claiming it as their own, with some of his characteristics, mainly his sexual interactions, omitted to protect moral virtues of the white woman. In the foreword of this book, the editors describe the aim as cultural achievement so that our people's personalities can be expressed, so that the Afrikaner should not be ashamed of what has been achieved. It will enhance our feelings of self-respect. As a child, during Christmas and New Year, our clan, the Herendiens of Atakwa, would have a regular spot at Seweweekspoort in the Swartberge. This was one of the most exciting parts of the holiday, as there would be no taking of animals for grazing, no fruit picking, no fetching of water from the river, and very few rules. This was one very important rule. Do not go deep into the water, as the mermaid will drag you with her long black hair. If you should see her, run, avoid eye contact, as she would hypnotize you, and she will have her wicked way with you. I never wandered off further than where I can be seen by my family and clan, even when we are sprayed by skunks and we were unable to sleep in our tents and huts. My isiXhosa father looked very different to my relatives, who were all visibly coy. The legend has it that in my family, that Daddy was the most at risk from being hypnotized, because he was so beautiful, and he would be drowned by the swirling water at the Grootgat, under the waterfall, where we camped for many days. There are two mermaids around our kraal. The one is under the waterfall at Seweweekspoort, just a few kilometers away, and the other was guarding the cave paintings, our ancestral graves, and the first graveyard and the hot water springs, while we have one water snake protecting the first and the second ancestral graveyard. On my last visit to the kraal in November 2019, I decided to go and look for the grave of my great ancestor, my great-great-grandmother, Oma Christina Herendien. I didn't quite make it to the first graveyard as the 45-degree heat was too immobilizing. I did, however, spend many hours in the gravesite closest to my Oma's house. I did see a sunken grave, but didn't pay that much attention. When I returned to my favorite aunt's house, she was hyperventilating and very cross about my negligence and my perpetual ignorance, as she calls it. She reminded me that being in the graveyard after 12 midday is forbidden. She reminded me about the collapsed grave that I saw at the entrance of the graveyard. She reminded me that in that sunken grave lived this huge snake with the diamond glass at the front of his head. This monstrous snake only appears after 12 midday, and since I haven't been in the graveyard for many years, it may not recognize me and mistake me for a stranger and then drag me into the sunken grave, never to be seen again. Since she sent her grandchild and her grandniece with me, she issued me a further warning. She warned me to stay away from the first graveyard and to stay away from the Groot Gat where the mermaid lived. I was sent to live with her family when I was a toddler, and she was a teenager at high school. She reminded me of the day when she followed the bigger children to the Groot Gat. There she encountered the mermaid who stared directly at her. The pool was whirling. She saw the mermaid and ran. She did not make eye contact, she says, but that night she could not sleep. She was living with my great-grandmother, Hester Herendien. Hester became upset because my aunt was restless all night. In the end, my aunt had no choice but to tell Oma what she saw. Oma promptly pulled my Auntie Connie out of bed and gave her a hiding of her lifetime. She never went to the Groot Gat again. My Auntie Connie promised me that if I should ever go to the Groot Gat again, she would give me a similar spanking as the one she got from my grandmother when she went to the Groot Gat. Kai gangangs for your time. Cape of Storms, Table Bay, Falls Bay, Cape of Good Hope, Settler, it was not yours to take. My name is Atakwa, and I was born extinct.